David Swanson is an American activist, blogger, and author. He co-founded the website After Downing Street, based around the U.S. congressional concern of the Downing Street memo. He also embarked on a campaign to impeach George Bush through contributing to the introduction of Dennis Kucinich's The 35 Articles of Impeachment and the Case for Prosecuting George W. Bush. He's an author of many books: Daybreak, The Undoing of the Imperial Presidency, and Forming a More Perfect Union, War is a Lie, and War No More. He's also the co-founder of World Beyond War.
Thank you, Jody. Great to be here and to see so many faces from back in the days of Republican presidents. In May 2005, some friends and I launched, as Ray mentioned and Jody mentioned, a website called afterdowningstreet.org, now also called warisacrime.org, to promote awareness of the Downing Street Minutes or the Downing Street Memo and related documents. This was a very useful document that was released in a moment when it could have an important impact. Like every war ever launched by anyone before or since, at least up until the age of openly blurting out steal their oil and kill their families, the 2003 stage in the Iraq War had been launched on the basis of lies, and has been and still is continued on the basis of other lies. We ought not to have needed any evidence. It is illegal, as we have heard, to attack another country under the UN Charter, also under the Kellogg-Briand Pact, not to mention the Hague Convention of 1899. And in this case, as with Afghanistan 2 years earlier, the UN had specifically rejected war. Launching a war is illegal and immoral no matter what weapons may be in the nation attacked and no matter what crimes that nation has committed. Launching a total assault on civilians to supposedly shock and awe them is illegal, even in the understanding of lawyers who ignore the illegality of war. Morally, it is one of the worst things ever done. Practically, it has never worked. Even if we accepted that weapons in Iraq or Iraqi crimes could justify a war, the evidence was very clear that these were lies. The Iraqi government was opposed to the group it had supposedly collaborated with. In 1995, Saddam Hussein's son-in-law had informed the US and the British that all biological, chemical, missile, and nuclear weapons had been destroyed under his direct supervision. After UN inspectors left Iraq in 1998, the lead inspectors said they'd come to the same conclusion. In 1999, at a primary debate in New Hampshire, George W. Bush said he'd take out Saddam Hussein. "I'm surprised he's still there," he said. In 2001, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, and others in the Bush administration were telling the media that Saddam Hussein had no weapons. They transparently switched their views on command. So when the Downing Street Minutes came out on May 1st, 2005, we jumped on it not as new information, but as evidence we could use, both to persuade others and to make a case in court or in Congress. These were the minutes of a meeting at Prime Minister Tony Blair's office on July 23, 2002, at which his head of so-called intelligence, just back from Washington, D.C., reported, as summarized in the minutes and recounted earlier by Ray McGovern, quote, "Military action was now seen as inevitable. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action, justified by the conjunction of terrorism and WMD, but the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy," end quote. And so they were, as has been documented in extensive detail. The White House war schemers and their collaborators forged documents, solicited desired claims rejected by their own experts, relied on non-credible witnesses, fed fake evidence to complicit so-called journalists, and tortured desired statements out of victims they had kidnapped. Bush concocted harebrained schemes to start a war that he publicly claimed he was trying to avoid. See, for example, the White House memo at After Downing Street or warisacrime.org/White House memo. But just the fact that the British had been informed that war was inevitable by July 23, 2002, ought to have been a big story in May 2005. We worked hard to make it such. pressuring a resistant corporate media that claimed either that it couldn't verify a memo that was clearly authentic and never even disputed, or arguing that it revealed only old news, even though it was brand new news to anyone informed by those media outlets. We made it into big news through public protests, reenactments in the lobbies of media outlets, floods of letters to editors, a wide variety of creative actions. But we had an advantage. Democrats in Congress were in the minority, and many of them were claiming they would take actions to end the war if given the majority. Key Congress members were supporting our efforts, or pretending to. I believe that we turned many of their encouraging claims into lies by shrinking rather than enlarging and intensifying our movement in January 2007. When Diane Sawyer asked Bush why he had made the claims he had about Iraq's supposed weapons of mass destruction, he replied, quote, "What's the difference?" End quote. Perhaps very little now, as we've been through 8 years with a president who launches wars without bothering to lie to Congress. Or perhaps very much now, as we showed our power to resist lies about Syria in 2013, as a decade of activism against a war on Iraq backed Congress away from supporting a new war. We have to make the answer matter. We have to tell the story properly, as half the United States still doesn't know it. The biggest lie now, believed by many Americans, is that Iraq benefited while the U.S. suffered. That second part is true, from the war that destroyed Iraq. Toward correcting that false belief, I submit into evidence, to complement everything Raed told us, a paper I wrote 3 years ago called Iraq War Among World's Worst Events, which can be found at warisacrime.org/Iraq. My biggest fear is that drone wars and proxy wars and secretive wars will continue to be launched without being preceded by public campaigns of lying. Or even worse, wars will be launched with honest proclamations that somebody's oil needs to be stolen, or some population needs to be slaughtered, and we won't resist or succeed in stopping these crimes. One of the best tools we have in this struggle is awareness of every lie used to support every past war. We must increase that awareness at every opportunity.